this is Corinne from Spirea Herbs and Snail Trails Homestead, and today you're going to be joining me in my kitchen. It's a blustery, frightful day outside, so we're going to stay in, and we're going to be making some elderberry syrup. So come on in and join me. Homemade elderberry syrup. The only ingredient that isn't optional are the elderberries. So what I have here is a half a cup of dried elderberries. If you're using fresh elderberries, you will want to use 1 cup. And if you can source them organic, that's the best. For all of my elderberry syrup this year, I used fresh, but after going through 25 pounds of elderberries, we are now out. So I'm using dried. The optional ingredients are 2 tablespoons, and again, this recipe is going to make you 1 jar, so 500 milliliters of elderberry syrup. So we have a half a cup of elderberries, 2 tablespoons of elderflowers, and the elderflowers are optional, 1 cinnamon stick, 3 cloves, or you can substitute this for 1/8 of a teaspoon of cloves. You can use fresh ginger root and grate in, I usually use, probably a couple of inches. Or the alternative is 1/8 of a teaspoon of dried ginger. And you're going to need about 3 cups of filtered water. And I'll bring you over to the stovetop in just a minute when we come back, and I'll show you what it'll look like when it's simmering, and then we'll talk about the next steps. So here are all of my ingredients simmering on my stovetop, and pardon my messy pot. We had a little bit of a boil over incident this morning. This also gives me the opportunity to show off this amazing hand-carved spoon my friend Sarah made for me. Thank you, Sarah. I absolutely love it, and I have dubbed it my elderberry spoon, so that's all I use it for. So what you're going to do, just like we discussed in the ingredients part, you're going to be adding your 3 cups of water. Now again, your pot's not going to look this full. I'm doing elderberry syrups for an order, so I'm making 10 today, so that's why I've got such a large pot of syrup going. You're going to add your 3 cups of water, either your half a cup of dried elderberries or 1 cup of fresh elderberries, and then your optional ingredients, your elderflowers, cinnamon, clove, everything's going to be put in your pot, brought to a boil, and once it comes to a boil, don't let it boil over like we did, and then you're going to want to reduce it to a simmer and have it simmering on your stovetop in your kitchen for at least half an hour. It's going to smell really quite lovely. And after you've had it simmering for a while, then we'll move to the filtration and the straining process, which I'll show you in a little bit. Back, my elderberry syrup has been simmering for probably close to an hour, and I'm ready to start straining. So I'm going to talk to you about some of the equipment that I use when I do this, some of the things I've tried that worked, and some of the things that don't work as well. So for sure, the first thing that I use is the potato masher, and when we go over to my stock pot with the syrup in it, you'll see this is what I use to mash the berries and then to release more of the juice. So that's really the only purpose of the potato masher. But here's some of the things that I have used to try to strain out my elderberries. So I started with cheesecloth. And cheesecloth works great if you are making a small batch of elderberry syrup. I think that it's probably one of your best options, and you can find it pretty much anywhere. So you would just place that over top of a smaller pot or maybe a Pyrex measuring cup, and then you could actually physically squeeze a lot of the juice out, wringing it out using the cheesecloth. But because I tend to make at least 10 jars at a time, sometimes more, the cheesecloth for me was not a great option. I found that I was making way more mess than anything else. Another option, which would involve filtering more than once, but a really great way if you're making a small batch to get the most out of your elderberries and squeeze a lot of the juice out, is to use potato ricer. And so you would actually strain your syrup right through this and squeeze it out. Just be forewarned, elderberries are very juicy, and it's probably going to look like a bit of a crime scene in your kitchen when you're done. But again, because I tend to do larger batches, this was a little bit of a cumbersome option, and honestly, it does make, when you're squeezing it, it does make quite a bit of a mess. And after the 18th time of wiping elderberry splatter off my walls, I decided that I wasn't going to go that way anymore. So what I use is a 2 filtration system. And so the first time when I'm straining out my berries and my cinnamon sticks and all that kind of stuff, I'll filter it through like not a fine mesh, but like a thicker meshed strainer. And this gets most of the debris and most of the stuff out. And you'll see when we go over, you can watch me do a little bit of it. I'll actually mash as I go and then dump and then kind of repeat that process to get a lot of the juice out. And then I'll wash my red pot. So I'll strain, I'll get you to come over here. My husband's filming for me today. So what I'll do is I'll strain from this pot into this one, give this one a nice wash, and then filter it back through with a really, I got this at a tea shop that I used to work at in Victoria, BC. And it's a super fine mesh strainer, and it catches everything else. So for me, I have found that filtering it twice works great. So I highly recommend getting, I think most strainers have these, but the little hookies, because most of the time I'm doing this by myself. So it makes the job much easier. So the first thing I do is like I said, I'll mash. I'm going to be walking right by here. Okay. Is I'm going to mash my berries with my potato or my masher here. And please be careful doing this and be mindful. One time last summer, I was making elderberry syrup and I was not paying as much attention as I should have. And the bottom of this slipped on a cinnamon stick, and I was actually making a much larger batch at the time using my big stock pot. And my whole hand slipped into the boiling syrup and I got some pretty severe burns because of that. So definitely be mindful while you're mashing out your berries. So that's all I'm going to do, just to release as much of the juice as possible. You know, us herbalists don't like to waste. And speaking of not wasting, the elderberries that we strain and filter out, we take the cinnamon sticks out and we give the elderberries to the chickens. Keep them nice and healthy over the winter months. And then it's a slow process, but like I said, likely you're only making 1 jar of elderberry syrup at a time, so it won't be as tedious for you. But I'll just take 1 ladleful at a time and slowly transfer. And as I do that, I can use the back of my ladle to press it. You can see, press a lot of that juice out. You can use your potato masher again, and I'll just pull out the cinnamon sticks as I go along. Cinnamon sticks are not a good thing to feed to chickens, so I tend to pull those out, tuck them in the sink. And this is what I'll do for my entire pot of elderberry syrup. I find my yield is a lot higher this way. I used to just do it the fast and lazy way and dump the whole pot through the strainer, but I found I got a lot more syrup this way. So slow and steady wins the race. When I'm done straining, I'll come back and show you how you add your honey, and then talk a little bit about canning your syrup if you choose to do that. To the last part of the video. So what I've done is I've strained out all of my elderberries and cinnamon sticks and elderflowers and all that wonderful stuff. And what I have left is basically an elderberry decoction. The difference between a decoction and an infusion, otherwise known as a tea, when we make tea, we pour boiling water over herbs and then we allow it to steep. A decoction, you're actually keeping the herbs and the water at a simmer, and so you're boiling them for a length of time. So in this case, I would say minimum 30 minutes up to an hour. So what I have left here is a decoction, and you can use this as a tea, but if you want a syrup is basically just a decoction or infusion plus a sweetener of some kind. And so when I make my elderberry syrup, I recommend, and when I tell other people how to make it, I recommend that you use raw local honey. If you can get it, it's got a lot of added benefits to it, nutrition, and also helps with things like allergies and supporting the immune system. So what you'll do for your recipe, the one that we talked about in this video, is you're going to add up to a cup of syrup, or of honey. And the honey is going to act as a preservative. So while it may sound like you're adding a lot, that's going to allow your elderberry syrup to last up to 3 months in the fridge. If you don't use any sweetener, it's only going to last a couple of days because it's basically a juice. So if you want to go that route, you just have to freeze some of it. I'm also going to talk, in the description below, there's going to be a link to the blog that is a companion to this video. It'll have the recipe all in detail. Plus it's going to have some instructions on if you want to can your syrup. and the benefits of that, plus or maybe some of the cons of canning. So I'll go through that in the blog as well. So if you're interested in that, definitely click on that link below. But for the syrup that you're making today with the 1/2 cup of dried berries or 1 cup of fresh, you're going to want to use up to about a cup of sweetener. And you can add that into your pot, or you can add it straight into your mason jar. It's pretty simple. Then make sure you label it. And again, there will be information on dosage and how to take your elderberry syrup in the companion blog. So thank you so much for joining me in my kitchen today, and have a great day.